There were two types of people at Ashbourne Intermediate School, those who knew about the Merit Club and those who didn't. My little brother Elliot was among the people who didn't know. He was a sweet kid, an innocent 6th grader, the kind that took notes during advisory and got picked on endlessly by the jocks. On Thursday, he was sitting at an empty table at the lunchroom, reading a book while the other 6th graders had gone out for recess. I sat down next to him and sat down my tray. "What's you reading?" Elliot pushed up his glasses and smiled. "The 13 Problems. It was on the fall reading list." "Sounds boring." "I think you like it, actually. It's a collection of murder mysteries." "I've graduated from mysteries," I said, picking up my slice of pizza. "Really? What's next for you, then?" I took a comically savage bite of my pizza and flashed Elliot a tomato-stained grin. "Real murder." Elliot laughed. I laughed with him. Tuesdays and Thursdays from 2:15 to 3 o'clock was time for club activities. Usually I would go to practice with the soccer club, but that day I had something else to do. Lingering by my locker, I tore out a sheet of notebook paper and took out a pen. "I want to join a club." Signed, Ethan Trace. Being careful not to be caught by the hall monitor, I went down into the basement level and made my way over to the broom closet where the Merit Club was famously rumored to meet. I folded the note and slipped it halfway through the gap under the door. After a few seconds, someone inside the broom closet took the note. I watched it slip under the door and out of sight. I felt my heart beat a little faster as I hurried back up the stairs and out onto the soccer field. After practice, I found the note taped inside of my locker. I unfolded it to reveal a short message in an unfamiliar handwriting. "The only way to join the club is to kill one of us. Think of it as a rite of passage." My stomach twisted as I thought of taking someone's life, a sickening thrill that I had grimly been preparing for. I clenched my fist around the note and pressed it down, deep down in my pocket. "The game's on," I muttered. Once you were amongst those who knew about the Merit Club, it was fairly easy enough to deduce who was in it, because they mysteriously went missing during the Tuesdays and Thursdays club periods, and the teachers could never find them. The one I decided it would be easiest to take out was Andy Bale, the silent kid in 6th grade. He shared his lunch table with the rest of the oddball freaks in Ashbourne, either staring and smiling at nothing or toying with a deck of playing cards. Sometimes he held out the fan deck to the kid sitting next to him, as if he was going to perform a magic trick. That made some people think he was in the Magic Club, but I checked and his name was never on the roster. On Monday, I came to school with a packet of rat poison in my backpack. Not the stuff that came in pellets, but the pure, white powder that was dangerous to even breathe around. During lunch period, I dumped the whole packet into a cup of water and swapped the cup with Andy's while he was looking away. Stupid kid, I thought to myself. It was like he didn't know I was coming after him. For the rest of the lunch period, I could hardly eat from the nauseating anticipation. I kept glancing at Andy's table, waiting for him to take a drink of his cup. "What are you looking at?" Elliot asked, peering at me quizzically. "Nothing," I said quickly. I looked back at him and noticed the bruises on his cheek. "What's that?" "Dylan Green said I was looking at Kate Michaels funny," he muttered. I clenched my fist. "Elliot, you can't keep letting people bully you." He sighed. "What do I do then?" I bit my lip. I hate Elliot's bullies. They broke his glasses, his nose. Sometimes the cheerleaders would even make a game of breaking his heart. I tried to help him, but that only made them tease him more. The scrawny little nerd who needed his big brother to bail him out of trouble. Elliot looked at me expectantly, with the glasses sitting crooked on his crookedly heeled nose. There wasn't anything I could tell him, but in my head I told him to wait. Just wait until I was in the murder club. Fortunately, before the silence between us grew too long, the bustle of the lunchroom was interrupted by gagging and a loud clatter and cries of alarm. I turned my head slowly. Elliot gasped. As I directed my gaze at Andy Bale's table, I prepared a similar mock reaction of surprise. But the body on the floor wasn't Andy Bale. It was a kid who always sat next to him. Genevieve something or another, with her blonde curls spread out on the lunchroom floor, and a smear of red vomit. Andy was still in his seat, looking straight at me, grinning. I swallowed. He must have known something was in his cup. Must have switched it with Genevieve's. I berated myself for thinking he was so foolish. Of course he was ready for my move. But then, as if reading my thoughts, Andy held up his cup, still full to the brim. I looked at Genevieve's tray. She hadn't gotten a cup of water for herself, just a carton of milk. That was now on the floor. Genevieve convulsed on the floor, coughing up blood-stained milk. Andy took a long drink from his cup. Then he looked back at me, smiled, and took a small flourishing bow like a magician after his act. Sirens wailed outside the windows, and the paramedics got to the lunchroom fast, but I knew how much poison I'd used. Genevieve was dead. School closed down after the incident, and Elliot told our mom and dad that maybe it was time we transferred schools. Maybe to somewhere in the city. He brought up the topic a few times before, like when Cynthia had been found floating at the bottom of the pool a couple months ago, when Liam had kneeled over last summer at the ball game, when Ricky had choked to death mid-presentation in March at the science fair. I had suggested switching schools too, back when I was smaller and more scared. It never worked. Our parents always shook their heads and told us Ashbourne was the best school in the area in that strange, monotone voice. As if the students being murdered on a monthly basis wasn't anything to be concerned about. As far as I could tell, all the other students' parents did the same. Nobody ever left Ashbourne, not the students, not even the teachers. Some whispered it was a curse. When school reopened, everyone who was alive was still there, while the ones who didn't know about the murder club tried to forget Genevieve's pale face and red eyes. The ones who knew discreetly turned their heads to the murders of the club. As they passed in the hallways, their unspoken conscience was that the murder club had killed Genevieve, just like any other mysterious death that happened in Ashbourne. As for me, I opened my locker to find a note taped up inside. "We appreciate your service. Please try again." Jasmine McCartney. In 7th grade was simply known to some as the Gardner Girl. If she ever made friends, she always abandoned them in favor of attending to the garden at the back of the school. During lunch, recess, some people joked that she was closer with the chickens than with humans, but those people didn't know that whenever the hens in the coop grew too old, it was Jasmine who slaughtered them and made chicken soup for the gardening club. I'm sure the gardening club invited her to join many times, but she never showed up unless it was for the soup. On Monday, I waited in anticipation in the garden shed, sweaty hands clasped around the handles of a long rusted pair of gardening shears. Soon, I began to hear footsteps coming down the gravel path. I flattened myself against the wall and tried to calm my breathing. The door creaked open. As soon as I registered Jasmine's brown hair and freckles, I lunged with all my might, and, just as she turned around in surprise, sank the blades of the shears 6 inches into her stomach. Jasmine coughed. She stumbled back, and I followed her, pressing the shears deeper into her. Trying to ignore the sickening squelching sound, Jasmine crashed against the shelves of the gardening equipment and crumbled to the floor. Blood bubbled onto the dusty floor of the shed. Jasmine's eyes flitted up to me. "I'm sorry," I muttered through clenched teeth. "But you should have seen this coming." Jasmine's pale lips twitched for a moment. I thought their shape resembled a smile. "Why do you want to be part of the club?" she breathed, a shocking calmness in her raspy voice. For Elliot, I replied. I yanked out the shears with one last cough. Jasmine slumped forward dead. The shed was filled with musty scent of blood. I wiped the shears with a rag used for drying the gardening tools and grabbed a shovel so that I could bury both. When I opened the door to leave the shed, I stumbled back as I realized someone was waiting outside. That's a noble cause, Jasmine McCartney said, smiling. Elliot, such a weak soul, and so many people would love to hurt him. I gawked at her stomach that was clean of gore, at the blood-stained rag in my hand, finally at the floor of the shed behind me. Kevin Fisher, from the field hockey team, lay dead on the floor, blood and guts spilling out of his stomach. His wide eyes, frozen in terror, stared back up at me. I swallowed hard and slowly turned my head to look at Jasmine. We appreciate your service, she said, smiling cheerily. Please try again. In a week's time, school had reopened again. I should have stopped my antics then. I should have been warned by the strange, unexplainable way the members of the murder club danced with death, taking the lives of 2 innocent people in their stead. I really should have realized that the club was using the same sinister tricks to keep me around for their entertainment. When the fingerprints of the blade shears the investigators found buried in the garden matched with Paul Tinson's instead of mine. But I couldn't stop. Not anymore. I told myself it was all for Elliot. That as a member of the murder club, I could steer the club to targeting his bullies until my little brother was finally free. A heroic cause. But more than anything now, I just wanted to take the smug grin off of Andy Bale and Jasmine McCartney's faces. Not just that. I would give them a show. At the end of the week was a school play, a production of the first 3 acts of Julius Caesar. I planned to kill the third and final member of the murder club there. Nico Harvey was a theater kid, though he only went to after-school rehearsals and never once showed up to theater club. He sat behind me in history class, and sometimes I could almost feel him watching me. Nico laughed like a psychopath and hummed bars of Tchaikovsky at random times. Habits made even creepier by his piercing stare that never broke eye contact. Despite his unsettling disposition, in the theater he ruled the stage, as if he actually possessed thousands of personalities and could adopt any of them as long as they were written in the script. In the upcoming play, he would take the role of Julius Caesar, the glorious Roman general who would be stabbed to death by 23 senators in the accumulation of the play. I planned out my moves much more carefully this time, determined not to give away where and how I decided to strike. I snuck in and out of the backstage days before the performance, avoiding the stage crew and studying the props. The daggers the senators would use to stab Caesar were designed like the classic toys used for pranks, with fox aluminum blades that retracted into the hilt when the wielder stabbed them into someone. With a few drops of the superglue and a tiny bit of sharpening, the props easily became weapons enough to pierce through flesh. Early morning, on the day of the performance, I carefully modified each of the 23 daggers and quietly slipped them back into the sheaths. Hands shaking with anticipation, I returned them to the prop table before the actors streamed into the backstage. The 2-hour-long play was agonizing wait. I kept glancing at Elliot, seated near in the front with his fellow 6th graders. Part of my conscience seemed to come back from the cold and cackling days as I thought about my little brother having to witness a slow, painful death I planned for Nico Harvey. My heart beat faster and faster, and a sickening feeling settled in my gut. But by the time I was desperately wishing I could back out, it was already too late. Nico Harvey, regal and beautiful in his crimson cape and laurel crown, walked onto the stage between the cardboard pillars of the Senate for the final scene. The waiting senators unsheathed their daggers and one by one stabbed them swiftly into Nico's chest. I thought they would stop after their first sight of blood, but when the blade sank through the white linen tunic, and gouged deep into the warm flesh. The actors didn't so much as blink. They kept advancing one by one, sinking their daggers into Nico Harvey, seemingly oblivious to the blood that slowly dyed his costume and streaked down his legs. And the crowd didn't stir, not even when the smell of blood drifted down the auditorium, not even when Nico staggered and fell backwards onto the stage with a wet splat. When I look around, everyone around me was watching the stage with glassy eyes that almost looked lifeless. Nico twitched silently on the bloodstained floorboards of the stage. The 23 senators watched him without a word until his convulsions stopped and he finally fell still. Travis Hemington, the kid playing Brutus, the traitor, slowly walked up to the stage and delivered the final lines in an empty voice. People and senators, be not frightened. Fly not, stand still, ambition's debt is paid. I jumped as the audience erupted in applause. The lights flared back on, illuminating the faces of the crowd. Some teary-eyed, some delighted, some just glad the boredom of listening to Shakespeare was over. The curtains opened and the actors walked onto the spotless clean stage and began to take their vows. The last to appear was Nico Harvey, the star of the performance, as clean as the stage and healthier than ever. He took his position next to Travis Hemington and, just before he bowed to the cheering crowd, looked straight at me and grinned. I felt my blood slowly turn to ice. The rest of the school day went by in a nauseating blur. Elliot raved on the bus ride home about how amazing the play had been and how good the actors were. He never once acknowledged the blood and the daggers like nothing unusual had ever happened. He had asked me if something was wrong, but I couldn't tell him what. When I arrived home, I refused the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches our parents had made for us and drifted off into my room. I pulled off my shirt and opened the closet to get change of clothes. When I saw what was inside, I choked back a scream. Travis Hemington, still dressed in his costume as Brutus the traitor, was limply crumpled on the floor of my closet. His chest and his sides were torn up into messy wounds, as if he had been stabbed over and over. Smeared on the back of the wall was a message written in blood. We appreciate your service. Please try again. I slammed the closet door shut, desperately trying to calm my breathing. The murder club was watching me. I'm suddenly sure of it. I was foolish to think they would ever take their eyes off me. I was certain they were watching even at this very moment. I stumbled around the room, looking under my bed, checking the locks on the windows, trying to ignore the crimson stain slowly spreading onto the carpet beneath the closet. Then I locked the door and spent the time until sundown trying to scrub the stain from the carpet, refusing to open the closet even as the drops of blood trickled out onto the floor. My parents and Elliot must have noticed the pallor in my face at the dinner table. They gave me concerned looks, but there was nothing I could tell them. I stuffed the mashed potatoes and peas into my mouth and retreated back upstairs, where I went back to frantically scrubbing at the stain that had spread through the width of the closet. Some hours must have passed until I fell asleep. I didn't even remember getting to bed, but when I woke up, I was underneath my covers. It was still dark, maybe 3 or 4 in the morning, and I was hearing sounds. We appreciate your service, someone whispered. Please try again. I bolted upright, already shaking. Who's there? The voice giggled. Try again, Ethan Trace. Please try again. I felt myself go pale. Standing at the front of my bed were 3 figures. With 3 sets of teeth glowed in the moonlight as they grinned down at me. Andy Bell, Jasmine McCartney, and Nico Harvey gathered around me, regarding me like hawks circling prey. Cradled in Jasmine's arms was the 4th figure, small and thin. It was Elliot. I gasped. What? What did you do to him? Jasmine giggled. Nothing, she said. Nothing yet. What do you want from me? Nico smirked. Well, you still want to join the club, don't you? What do people call it? The murder club? No. No, please. Just leave me alone. That's a pity, Nico said, grinning coldly. I would hate for anything to happen to your brother. Elliot groaned, stirring in his sleep. Andy reached out his fingers and softly stroked his hair. Don't touch him, I cried. Jasmine beamed. So, you'll try again? Try again? Yeah. It has been great fun playing with you. We'd hate for you to quit. And besides, Nico mused, you might finally get one of us someday. You might kill one of us, once and for all. And when that happens, who knows? He chuckled, a sound that chilled my bones. Maybe then, you'll finally learn the real secrets of our club. There were 3 types of people at Ashbourne Intermediate School. Those who knew about the murder club, those who didn't, and me. Travis Hemmington's body was gone without a trace in the morning. Even the stain on the carpet had vanished, as if it had never been there at all. Elliot complained about some bad dreams he had as the school bus rumbled over dirt roads. I think I saw Jasmine McCartney, he said. She was the only good part. She had flowers in her hair, and she was holding a chicken from the garden in her arms. I nodded absently. She was really pretty, Elliot sighed. Do you think she would talk to me if I said hello? We appreciate your service. Please try again. We appreciate your service. Please try again. Please try again. Please try again. Please try again. Their laughter echoes throughout my head, their pitiful mockery of smiles flashing before my eyes. I pressed my hand onto my pocket, feeling the weight of the switchblade I had taken from my father's drawer. Yeah, I said meekly. I have a feeling she likes you already.